So to make all of this work, we need a way to control when is stuff loaded, how do we split our big application into smaller pieces. And all of this tech is what we refer to as microfrontends. So the challenges we want to deploy independently. We don't want to deploy whenever an external developer is finished with changing the headline or whatever they're changing. We also want to be able to figure out if some of the dependencies that external or maybe internal apps are depending on, maybe there's a new vulnerability in them, or maybe they are just using a button that we don't really want to use more because we want pink buttons or whatever. So we want to control some of the dependencies that all of these apps have. But it also comes at a chance that we don't really have access to the developer's code. They're just submitting something to us. And at the same time, we want to be a bit future-proof, so we don't want to log in on any specific technology. So that's some of the challenges that we're facing in this. And just to frame it again, microfrontends are completely separate services like we know from microservices. Except we do it in the front end. And we have this piece in the end, after all the apps have been built, tested, etc. There's something that's built, that's this app, JavaScript file, whatever. But at some point we need to merge those, figure out when should we load it and how do we actually load it. And this part that's some of all the stuff that we're talking about. How can we actually control this? And of course, all of these microfrontends could be depending on, maybe these two are depending on the same button component or whatever it might be. That's further up before this in the chain. And to get around this challenge, we're using Webpack's module federation that allows us to have separate builds that each together can form a single application. But in order to do, we cannot have any circular dependencies. So we cannot have a tabbed component that needs the button and the button needs the tabbed, because how can you then deploy independently? And with module federation, we're also in control of the subpages that are used. If we have 5 apps, each of them use the button. Again, we don't want to load 5 different buttons. We want to load only one to make sure that we are still performing great and don't load too much data into the user's computer. So that's something we can get from using module federation. Next off, we want to combine all the stuff again, and that's where we're using single spec. Really, to use single spec, what we need is all the bootstrapping information. We need to know that we need a menu point. It should be named this. When you click it, here's the path to where you can actually load the data. And we also need to keep track of who can actually see that data. Do we want all of our users, or only when you are on asset home for a cat machine, for instance? So all of this static data is something we need to define. This will probably be mentioned a bit later as well, but this is just a quick example. It's always easier to get an idea of what does it actually mean. But this is what it means. We have a spec. It defines how does this app look in the marketplace, what's the name, etc. What dependencies do we have? What account IDs is it valid for, or should it be valid for all the users, or whatever it might be? And when all of that is in place, well, we need some hook that actually connects the code built in the app with the host, the Trackunit manager. And that's where single spec comes in. And all we actually need is some bootstrap, some mount, and some onmount methods. And these can be defined whether you're using Swells, plain JavaScript, React, whatever. But it's just these 3 methods that are actually the anchor to actually getting the code up and running and mounted in the DOM. To actually render them, we're using iframes. And one thing that should come to your mind when mentioning iframes, that is they're terrible to work with. And there's lots of ways that they are terrible to work with, but it's mostly because they actually sandbox lots of the stuff. And by sandboxing, it also means that we are a lot in control of what is being loaded, what can actually be executed inside this iframe, and all of this. And for our case, that's actually good because we want that control of what code is, or what can the code do inside this iframe. It also means that we can actually mock the host, where the host is Trackunit manager. We could ship something that is, here's a app developer thing. Instead of loading the entire manager and have to click the menu item, we can actually mock it. We are not there yet, but this technology supports it. So I think that's a quick intro to Microfrontends and how we tackled it. Let's go a bit more into how to use it. Yes, that's you, maybe.